So now that we have the shooting logic set up for semi-auto and at least replicating from the server to the client, again, we don't have a current way of doing client to server or any client to client, visual testing until we do it through the ability. We want to go ahead and set up the full auto logic. So we're going to do that through a timer, and we're just going to wrap this stuff here inside of a fire function. So to begin, let's go to our firearm logic component, and we can just make a protected function called fire. So void fire, and create that definition. I'm going to move it right above our onRep and cut and paste this into it. So that way, inside of the onRep trigger count, when we want to shoot, we just call fire. So now we're just going to pretend that we do, we are having we have a full auto firearm. So we're going to do get world timer. Oh wait, that's right. It's not accessible from the components for some reason, but get world timer manager dot set timer. So we need a timer handle. So let's go ahead and create that handle. So f timer handle. We'll call it the full auto timer handle. So we use that. The object is going to be this, and the function that we want to call is going to be fire. So u firearm logic component fire. Then we want the delay, which in our case, let's do 0.08 or 75 or something like that. Something pretty quick. And then true, because we want it to loop. Then when we want to stop shooting, so the else runs, we want to grab the timer manager again and clear timer. And the timer we want to clear is the full auto timer handle. So very simple setup. Let's go ahead and close out of the editor, recompile, relaunch, and test it out. Okay, once we are back in the editor, we can go ahead and, at least for now, just close out of all this and give it a try. So let's first off just do as standalone, or listen, doesn't really matter, and left click. So it is firing until I let go of the mouse button, like so. So that appears to be working. Let's try 2 clients. And again, the client won't replicate, so we just need the client to visually see it happen, which it does because it stops once I release the left mouse button. So visually, we are good to go there. And everything so far seems to be good to go from a client perspective or server perspective. We really need to test it on the client to, make sure we don't fire any extra shots or anything like that. But anyways, we have full auto implemented like so. So we're not going to do the full auto logic yet. And when I mean full auto logic, I'm talking about setting the fire mode. That's going to be something defined through the data asset. And that is also something I would potentially like the ability to cycle through. So have a, option between semi and full auto for certain firearms that support it. So now that we have this, we can actually start working inside of the ability. So what we want to do in the ability is basically get access to the firearm logic component. So we're going to create a protected section. And inside of here, we want a U property. It's going to be a T object pointer of U firearm logic component. So we'll just forward declare it and call it firearm logic component. Now, the reason we are storing it is because of the case of full auto. So this ability is not just going to start and end immediately. Instead, it is going to start, and then on trigger release, we're going to end it, or we might just check the fire mode directly. And if we are in semi-auto, I've never done batching before with a ability activation, but I would like to try and figure that part out because that would add some efficiency for semi-auto firearms. So instead of, trying to RPC the activation and the data being passed and the end, I believe we can wrap this all into kind of like one, batched RPC. Again, I'm not 100% sure on this, but now we just need a function. So firearm logic component, get firearm logic component. So in order to get it, we need the current actor info because we want the avatar actor. And from this, we want the shooter pawn component. So from the avatar actor, we want to find component by class of skg shooter pawn component, which means we need to include it here. So now that we have that, so shooter pawn component, we are going to want to grab the held actor. So if, let's call it, a actor, held actor equals shooter pawn component, get held actor. We can then get the firearm logic component from this held actor. So if, we can just set it right here. So firearm logic component equals held actor, find component by class, firearm logic component. So we need to also include this guy here. Okay, so we now have our firearm logic component, hopefully, and we return the firearm logic component. So basically what we're wanting to do here is simply, if the firearm logic component is invalid in the can activate ability, we just want to do, nothing. We're going to return false, and the ability is never going to actually activate. So that's the overall plan of this setup. So we'll end up doing that once we, get everything working. So inside of activate ability, we want to get the firearm logic component. So that way we can simply call press trigger. And likewise, in the end ability, we want to call release trigger. So what we can do is basically just kind of fire off a press and a release more or less instantly if we want to. However, I would like to do it when we release the input. So input released. So let's override that, add it to the CPP, and here I want to end the ability. So end ability. So handle actor info, activation info, false, and false, because we don't want to replicate this and we don't want to end the ability. We want to replicate the end ability, So true, because I believe this happens, let's see, let me read it. Okay, that description does not help very much. Let's go to its declaration. Okay, so if be replicate is set to true, so in this context, this variable, I believe, try to replicate the ending to the client/server. So that should be what we want there. So now that we have this, let's go ahead and set it up so where we can actually confirm that this is activating. So UE log temp, warning, activate, or let's just call it fire ability, or activated fire ability, and then ended fire ability. So let's close out of the editor, recompile, relaunch, and let's just kind of give it a try and just see, roughly what's happening. Okay, so once we are back in the editor, we can go ahead and let's go to our player controller so we can load up the ability inputs. We want to add the ability input of fire, and we need a fire input action. So let's duplicate aim and just call it fire. So let's plug that in, save it, close it, and go to the IMC abilities. So the mapping context for our abilities, and we want it for fire, and we want this for the left mouse button. So let's save that, close it, and remove this testing logic here. So compile save. Let's first off test as standalone again. Side left click, and nothing appears to be happening. And I just realized we forgot to add the ability when we equip the 1911. So let's go to the 1911 data asset. Here we are adding the aim ability. Let's also add the fire ability. So we save that, press play, left click, and everything seems to be working as normal in this regard. So we are activating the ability and then ending the ability when we release. So let's try it as a listen server with 2 clients and do the same thing. So everything seems to be working there as well. Now let's try from this guy. So the server can now see the client shooting, because in this case anyways, the server is also running that ability. So now if we do client to client, we should be able to see this as well, like so. Also just happen to have issues down there, and I believe that to be the server running the same ability, which is just launching a trace straight down. So we're seeing the server's version of the trace as well. So that's pretty much going to wrap up this video until we, move forward with some additional logic. But I do want to talk about some additional things that we are going to be doing and kind of how we are going to be doing them. So we're not just going to call press and release trigger. What I want to do is I would rather basically, because given the nature of the game, it is not a competitive multiplayer, PvP game. It is PvE, and it's not really, cheating's not really much of a concern. And even then, we can do checks to prevent it, prevent some of it, the real obvious and bad stuff. Basically, what I want to do is let's pretend I am on the client. When we activate the fire ability, I want to perform a trace. So in the firearm logic component, we're going to have not just a fire function, we're going to have a perform trace function that actually performs the line trace out to see what we hit. So we are not going to use projectiles in this series. I mean, ultimately, from here to here is probably the farthest you're going to be shooting, because even out the window and such, you can't see very far just given due to the fog and everything. So you're not going to be having super long shots. So we're going to be using line traces. Likewise, what I want to have happen is we're going to call that perform trace function. It's going to return a hit result where you're going to make some target data inside of this ability from that hit result and pass it to the server. So the server here is basically just going to be more or less listening for us to shoot. So we're both going to fire, the press trigger and all that. Well, the server's going to fire the press trigger because the server wants to replicate it to everybody else. However, what do you call it? The server is going to be, inside of this ability waiting for target data. So basically waiting for the hit. Once it receives the hit, it can then go through and validate it, make sure, that was a possible shot. For example, if we wanted to, do some cheat checking. And if it is, the server will go through and apply damage accordingly. So if let's say we hit the head of the zombie, the server is going to deal damage to, whatever the damage multiplier is for the head with the given firearm. So that's the overall idea on how this is going to work. And then once that's received, again, if we are in semi-auto, we are going to just simply end the ability. We're not really going to do, anything else. There's no additional work to be done at that point. If we are in full auto, we are basically just going to be kind of more or less performing a loop inside of this activate ability, only on the client, so not the server. And every time that loop fires off, we're basically going to be performing a shot locally, sending the target data to the server, and just kind of going from there. So with that said, I will see you in the next video when we actually get started on this sort of setup. If you like what I'm doing and you want to help support me, you can find a link to my Patreon down in the description below, where you can also gain early access to this entire series.